In terms of tooling, is anybody using Log Manager? A couple of people. So this is another one of my favorite tools that Progress has made available. And I tell people, like, build it into your code that you deploy to production, right? So when a user calls and says this screen is slow or this is slow, you can have them do like Control-Alt F11, which will enable Log Manager. I'll go into this in a second, right? And then Log Manager, you tell them repeat what you just did that was slow. Log Manager will log everything that happens, and then you take that log, you send it to support or development. So what does Log Manager do? Essentially, it's an object that's available to you in your code, and when you enable it, it writes to the log file here called, in my case, paulorders.log. You set a logging level, and then you tell them what do you want to log. And for us, what we're really interested in is query info. And that'll tell us deep information about which query was executed, how many records were read, how many index blocks were read, how many good records were returned, right? Because I could read 1 million records, but only return 2 records. So that's really, really, really important here. So imagine, again, you tell your users, do Control-Alt F12, run your query again, Control-Alt F12 a second time, a log file is generated, your system automatically emails the log file with all the details of what they just did, every parameter that was passed, all of that detail, so you could very quickly debug that problem without having to try to reproduce it in your own dev and test environment, for example. All right? 4GL Trace I really like, because 4GL Trace not only tells you every run of every procedure, every method, every program, it shows you all the runs, but it also shows you all of the parameters that were passed between each run statement. So a lot of times, okay, you know that I ran this .p, which ran this procedure, which ran this method, which ran this other .p, but then you don't realize, oh, look at that, he passed question mark as parameters, and it did a full scan of whatever, business object, and you didn't realize that it was doing that. And you'll see that in the Log Manager output. So again, this is one of my favorites in terms of a really easy thing you can integrate into your application as tooling. All right? So what do you get as output? Let me zoom in on the, oops, hey, I like this. I love this zoom thing on these. So it tells me, okay, good. You did a for statement, that's great. Which table? Customer. Which index? Custom. All right, great. It's paulorders.p line 9. And then here's where it gets really interesting. It tells me I did 3.6 million database block accesses overall, of which, what is that, 200,000 were in the customer table, 200,000 were in the customer index, 727,000 were in the order table, and 928,000 were on the cust order index. And again, I don't know your application. I don't know if these numbers are good or bad, but presumably you as the developers should know that if I was looking for one order for a customer and I just did 727,000 order reads, then maybe there's an opportunity to improve your code here. Or maybe it's normal for you, I don't know. But you have these statistics that start to make sense, all right? Why do anybody want to tell me why I have 900,000 order reads, index reads here, but only 700,000 table reads? Anyone want to fathom a guess? No one?
Shared buffers.
Sorry?
Shared buffers.
Shared buffers. No, not shared buffers. The indexes are multi-level, right? So you're traversing multiple levels of the index here to get through. So you're naturally going to, as you do for each order and then each order line of order, you're naturally going to traverse down into a multiple level index, which means maybe you did 3 block reads to get to the first key, then you're jumping across, but then for your next order you did 3 block reads, and then you're jumping across the index like that. So this is natural to see this kind of thing for very, very large tables, I should say. All right. But again, the important thing is having these numbers and having the ability to decide, is that normal or is it abnormal for this particular system, right? And also cool here, I'm showing you guys over here, where to go. The number of useful records. So I mentioned that earlier. So having this useful record count here, you know, if at the end you did 700,000 reads, but it told you I only extracted 2 useful records, again, it's an indication that your query is probably not as efficient as it needs to be. Here's my example that I wanted to show. So an unindexed field, I did 200,000 record reads, but I returned 28 records to the user. Questions? So far, so good? Good? Everyone's awake? I got my thoughts. All right.
Just before you move on,
yeah,
you mentioned a few of the log entry types. There are lots of them in addition to those ones. They're documented in the debugging and troubleshooting manual in the documentation section.
Yeah, great point. Lots and lots of different. The other one, in fact, that I use here, that I showed you guys here at the bottom, I put 4GL-trans in there, but there are a bunch of different log entry types that you can add. 4GL-trans is interesting because it shows you the begin and end of every transaction. So if you're not too sure about your transaction scope and the blocking, you can run with 4GL-trans and it'll show you very clearly where your transaction scope begins and ends in your program, right?